As Desi woke, she blinked against the dim light of the morning. The window was close enough to reach out and touch, and she listened to the patter of misty rain against the glass. On the pane, 1,000 droplets of rain dotted the window, sometimes joining together and running down in streaks. She stretched before pulling the blanket up higher, snuggling under the sheets and enjoying the comforting warmth. Outside, it was cold, wet, and building into thoroughly miserable weather. It would be wonderful to just stay there all day. But that wasn't going to happen. Today was also 2 days before Shell. Short of Shell itself, today was her favourite day of the week, and she rolled over luxuriantly, enjoying the warmth under the blankets. This semester her classes were arranged so she had today off. That made it a day for having fun and getting things done. She rolled her shoulder and stretched one more time, before reaching out to pick up her Omnipad. Usually today would be devoted to study time. There would have become time to enjoy running into town while her father cooked her human food, having fun over lunch with the girls, then helping him out at the museum. Then back to the dorm, dinner and study group with the girls again. It was great. All the sacrifices and effort she'd, and even outright connivingly she put into securing a place in the academy, had paid off more than she'd ever dared to hope. Sure, she'd known it would be work, and it was, but the academy had few equals and none that were better. And here she was, learning beside girls who were the best at what they did. She dreamed of making a future here, and now she had a family. 2 actual mothers and a father. Alright, so he was a little crazy, and could be pretty weird and was a whole lot tall, but her father could cook. There would be summer, going to live in a real home and getting to know them. She had grandmothers and... Goddess, I need to ask about his family. Who else do I have? Her father! Goddess, that felt so good. Of course, her father and mothers were off this show to celebrate their wedding. They could plan the traditional one later, but they were married and legally her parents now. Of course they were off to celebrate. That gave her a lot to get done before they left, and she pulled up today's schedule. 7:30 a.m. Breakfast. 11 a.m. Lunch. In town next week. Noon. Mel on clothes. / eek. 1 p.m. Work at the museum. 5 p.m. Dinner. 6 p.m. Meeting with Mel. It wasn't the normal sort of day. Any other week she settled in for spending time with their study group after dinner, but tonight Melondi had her meeting planned. Everybody had been invited, even Dihsala. Jaxmi would be there with Dr. Forsyth Painter, and the twins had practically glued themselves to Dr. Painter Forsyth. The pair had only shown up for dinners, and even then, they'd been ceaselessly checking their Omnipads. But they got real internships. Good for them. And it was. She loved them both, but once they got going on physics or engineering, the Kerbal sisters became lost in their own world. They deserved internships, and 2 years early? It was a stroke of good fortune most women would give their left tusk for. Jaxmi had been first in line to congratulate them both, though she practically turned grape with envy. She crawled out of bed, frowning at the room controls, as she pulled off her nightshirt and made a fast grab for her robe. The thermostat said the room was set to 80, but as she made her bed, her nipples were already hard as rocks. Outside, it was barely going to be 40, and it was freezing next to the window. She gave her bed a second look, inspecting her work before heading for the showers. A hot soak would be just the thing. Her Omnipad pinged. There was a message waiting. Setting down her kit bag, she grabbed up her Omnipad. DS. Would you like to meet this morning to discuss the sim if you have time? Dihsala. Desi looked at the message and grumbled inwardly. Dihsala was not one of her favourite people, but at least she was becoming bearable. Just sort of. She blew aside a lock of hair that swept over her eyes and sighed. It would help keep the peace. Fine. Meet me in the study room at... 9? She hit enter and waited a bit. If Dihsala just sent it, then she probably still had her DS. Okay. Don't waste time saying thanks. Ah well, it would be a good day. Maybe a little weird, but it would be a good day. Everyone was there at breakfast except for the twins. Desi spotted them making their way out toward the university hotel on the way down, and the pair were only doing a fast saunter because they refused to run. With Shinshiki there, that made only 11 of them, and they were able to keep to the medium-sized table they liked. I need to make more of an effort with Shinshiki. It's not like I don't have an alien in my family already. Sitting 2 seats over, the peasant girl was chewing thoughtfully on a very rare Turok steak, and cutting away what she muttered about as the icky bits. Goddess. It sure became a lot easier saying goddess instead of empress these days. Malondi was sitting to her left, mediating between Lark and Nesfa. Talk was still going on over the wedding. Lark was happy not to do any more press conferences, while Nesfa was advocating another interview to set the record straight. She kept her head down and listened. There had been plenty of girls wanting to know about the human guy when she'd gotten into the class. Even more once the word got around about Belda dating a human guy their age. Even if most of that had fallen on Belle's shoulders, there was still a lot of curious girls to go around. Then there'd been the fallout over teaching Professor Bergress's class on marriage fundamentals, and the news about the attack in the library. Some of the girls on campus acted as if she and her classmates were like oracles into the human mind. And getting a human guy, and questions about the wedding, and the dancers. That's bad enough, but they'll go crazy when they find out Belle's getting married. Ah well. Except for the library, it had all been good news, hadn't it? Still, there were only so many times you could give advice on... Desi? Belda leaned in from her right and whispered, Can I ask some advice? Great, I may have branded myself into a corner. Shame I don't get paid. Desi sipped at her tea. It was starting to get cold and gave Belle a smile. Any time. About what? Well, you're Professor Warwick's daughter, so before I just descend on him, I thought I should ask you first. I mean, I'd ask your mother, but, well, they're both probably packing, you know? Belda squirmed in her seat awkwardly. I mean, he said they would be yesterday, and I don't want to interrupt anything, but it's kind of important. Desi's smile grew warmer. Someone was asking her permission before approaching the man in her family. It was new, and it felt nice. Still. Hey, I appreciate you asking. A lot, but he's still our professor too. Desi set her tea down, tuning out the rest of the table. Belle still looked worried. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. That's the thing, I don't know. You remember when I started seeing Liam and Professor Warwick told us about those flower things on the wrist? I didn't do that with him at all, and now I want to propose. Belda whispered back hoarsely, before giving her a miserable look. What if I miss something and mess it up? Ah. You shouldn't worry so much. Desi jerked a thumb over her shoulder towards Lark and Nesfa. With a wedding like that, I can't imagine Liam's going to be a real stickler for protocol. I mean, he liked the wedding, didn't he? Mostly. He said the question and answer thing was out, and he kind of got pink when I told him how many people might come, but... Belda screwed up her face pensively. Mostly, yes. There you go, Desi nodded. I think he's just working on the sim this morning. You should give him a text on his number. He'd probably be happy to drop by his office. Thanks, Desi. Belda was blushing again. The girl was just so reserved and painfully shy. Are they all like that out on the farm worlds? Be honest. It sounds a lot nicer than how I grew up. Belda grinned sheepishly. For all I know, he's supposed to propose to me. Ah, I don't know who proposed to who. I appreciate it, Desi. Belda was smiling happily as she pulled apart her papaya. You give the best advice. It should be a good day. Really. Desi made her way into the conference room, just as her omnipad was showing 9. Dihsala was already there at the head of the table, resting her chin on her hands as she examined a map of Earth on the conference screen. She didn't even look away as Desi set down her satchel in a chair. "Morning." "What's up, Dihsala?" Desi folded herself into a chair, glancing up at the map. It showed the sectors of Europe and the state of the Sim at the end of yesterday. "You didn't say 2 words at breakfast, and the rest of the team isn't here. I'm guessing this is just about Germany." "Mm-hmm," Dihsala grumbled, then stretched and looked at her for the first time. "I've been thinking about it all night. We're stuck, and I didn't want the twins here. I don't trust Italy." "They haven't committed. I'm not sure that means a lot, though," Desi offered. It felt difficult to concede the point to Dihsala, even if the sisters had been acting flakier than usual. Mostly they were focused on the Dr. Painter, but still, it felt like she was being disloyal. "They're just focused on other things right now, and you have to admit you were catering to Jaxme. I know we want the Ottomans with us, but you have to throw Italy a bone." "Why? Italy is throwing itself one. That marriage to Princess Mary in England, where did that come from? We could have married off Oscar or Joachim to her, and put a stop to all this nonsense. There's only 4 or 5 years between them, and they'd have been a perfect match." Dihsala grumped, waving a hand at the map. "Now England is crossing the channel with this expedition, and our army didn't get a breakthrough into France." That felt like a critique, and it was too early in the morning for this. "They still aren't fully committed to the war. Not like it could have been, particularly since you're insisting on unrestricted submarine warfare around France. What if they hit someone else? They were warned. If someone else gets hit, then it's their fault for blundering into a war zone." "I could have stayed in bed until noon." Desi rubbed her eyes and tried to make the best of it. "Look, we went over this, and we're going with the options we have. Why are you so focused on winning this anyway?" Dihsala huffed, glaring at the screen in raw defiance, then seemed to collapse on herself a bit, glaring suddenly at the notes on her omnipad. "You wouldn't understand." "Could have stayed in bed, could have stayed in bed. What's that supposed to mean?" Grabbing her satchel and getting out of here was so tempting. "If this is about me being born a commoner, I swear I'm going to—" "It's about family, but not like that," Dihsala snapped, glaring again. "You didn't have one until this week, I get that. Well, did you ever think about the problems of having one? I mean it. Did you?" The conversation had taken a sharp turn into the unexpected, and Desi groped for something to say. The fact that she didn't have anything was as much an admission to herself as anything else. "I just always thought it would be perfect. I spent my time envying people who had someone. So honestly, no, I didn't." Desi eased her hand away from her satchel. "So fine, maybe I don't get it, but if you tell me, maybe I will." "Sure, whatever." Dihsala snapped again before pursing her lips tightly. The girl looked like she was strangling inside, trying to choke something down. "Things have been unsettled in my family for a while now." "You mean with your mothers and the whole blackmail thing?" Desi stopped herself. That had been harsher than she wanted, but there weren't a lot of easy ways to say it, were there? "It wasn't blackmail, it was extortion," Dihsala grumbled reluctantly. "I sort of picked up on things at home, but this last year things came to a head." Dihsala looked away, gesturing at the notes and rules scattered over the table. I guess I want to prove I can be the best. That way I can step in, show my family I can shoulder some of the load. Make sure things are put right, however it turns out, you know?" "So that's why you've been such an aggressive bitch." At least she wasn't letting that out. It explained a lot, but it was still a lot to forgive. Dihsala had been professionally insufferable, but maybe there was a reason. She spent all her time looking at the other girls like they lived storybook lives. Even though an assassin coming after Melondi proved how bad it could be, she hadn't thought about all the others. The twins and Jaxme practically lived for their family business. Pris was set to follow in her mother's footsteps. Sefer and Nesfer too. Even if they had fights with their families, it seemed more like quibbles about how than if. "Maybe I have more in common with Zenjiki than I thought, and maybe I should have thought about this more." See? I told you. You want your piece of me? There you go. Dihsala shot her an angry look, then quietly huffed, grabbing at her nose to pack them away. Well, I'm not wallowing in self-pity. I'm not giving up. Hey, wait. Desi put a hand on Dihsala's omnipad before it got swept away. You're right, okay? Yeah, I guess I didn't get it. I never had a family to worry about, and you all seem so perfect. But I do understand needing to prove yourself. So, tell me about this idea you wanted to go over. Desi waited as Dihsala stopped putting her things away. The look between them drew out, and lingered. Dihsala stopped grabbing up her things and settled down. Did we just have a moment? Yeah. Fuck, let's not do that again. Desi shook her head. So, what's your idea? Alright, so it's just going to be a weird day. Wandering down the hall, Desi paused as she heard someone calling her name. Turning around, she recognized Prindi Amandis, hurrying up the hall. The girl was in her economics class. Hey, Desi! Prindi jogged the last little bit, offering a smile. I was wondering, have you seen Lark around? I've been looking for her and Bree all morning. Oh, I think she's off in a strategy meeting for her team. Something up? Oh, not much. Prindi shrugged with a grin. Just trying to finish up the edits for the next vlog. Plenty of time, but I haven't seen her anywhere. Did she join a sports team? No. Desi shook her head. It's an assignment for our humanity class. We're running for a war sim for the next 2 weeks. It's a lot of points for the winner. Really? How cool! Prindi was already charging off. I'll look for her later. Thanks. First years. The girl was a bundle of energy. Oh well. She seemed nice enough for part of the IOTC crowd. Desi made it to lunch early. It was kind of a relief to take a break from Dihsala, but truthfully the idea she had wasn't bad. It had prospects, if they had the points to sink into it. It was worth a try, and it was probably just as well the others didn't know. Anyway, it let her grab an early lunch before this thing with Melondi. Rounding into the cafeteria from the serving line, she spotted Kazna and Kamara, whichever was which, sitting alone in the corner at one of the small tables for 6. She smiled as she reached their table. Hey, not seen you two for days. Mind if I join you? The twins looked up at her and blinked a moment, pausing in the way they sometimes did before smiling back. Hi, Desi. Their voices in stereo didn't even seem all that weird these days. Have a seat, the sister on the left offered, before her twin carried on. Actually, we're glad to see you too. Oh? Settling her tray down, she took a seat facing them both. What's up? We wanted to ask for your advice, the twin on her left said animatedly, while her sister nodded enthusiastically. I really should get paid for this. This doesn't have anything to do with Professor Warwick, does it? Desi eyed them both warily. Or the wedding? What? Oh, goddess, no. The sister on the right exclaimed as they blushed at her. Oh, fine. Desi sagged into a chair in relief, reaching for her Rebecca juice. You would not believe how many girls have been asking me things since the wedding. At least once the news about Belda gets out, she'll be getting all the questions. I bet, left twin breathed sympathetically. I hope it goes well. We do, agreed right twin. It's a big step. Anyway, what's up? Something about the sim? Desi took a long sip of her juice. It was cold out, but it still tasted nice. We're thinking about sleeping with Dr. Painter. Desi coughed violently, gagging for breath as she choked on her drink. Left twin sighed. I told you we should have asked Professor Zarin. High Advocate Opimea Potak studied her hostess. Over time, the reach and scope of the Ministry of the Interior had taken on aspects of control that necessarily kept pace with the staggering scope of the Imperium, fostering its interests through the will of the throne. Sequestered within her office, Minister Lorem Raylin's power, were it truly understood, was staggering. In the hands of someone unequal to the task, it would possibly be insidious, a precarious set of balances that weighed heavily upon the moral character of the woman filling the office. As for checks, with the Empress away from Shill, it knew only 2, including herself. Seated on the opposite side of Lorem's desk, High Advocate Potek folded her hands expansively over her girth, but refrained from smiling. As an Adixie, it tended to make most Shilvanti nervous, most Rakiri thoughtful, and most Helcom disappear. The disconcerting effect of rows of razor-sharp teeth varied amongst the myriad races of the Imperium, but no matter the race or government, they were universally understood. Smiling without showing teeth was a necessary social skill. Now then, you've read the report, otherwise you wouldn't have invited me over. She could smile later. Lorem was one of those rare individuals she had worked with long enough for a smile to be properly understood, and the woman didn't frighten. Potek cast her head to one side, eyeing her hostess, keeping her voice convivial. It was business, after all. I've given the recommendation some thought. The upper limit seems reasonable. Something to drink? Kavan, perhaps? Lorem was already pouring herself something, and gestured to the tray. A bottle of Kavan was there, naturally, and Potek let a few teeth show. That's a bottle of dark currant, I see. I really don't know why you pretend. Surely no one but an Adixie could possibly have a taste for it. Perhaps, though if you're not interested. Let's not be hasty, I didn't say that. Potek's teeth showed in full as she leaned forward. I'll have a glass, and don't stint on your own. I think before the end of this conversation we're both going to need it. You think so? Lorem looked back at her for a moment, but topped her own up before pouring the Kavan, offering it over as she took a seat beside her, rather than behind her desk. It was a gesture of equality, and it wasn't lost on Potek. Oh, come. You saw the report. It started out at 40 million credits, but my forensic accountants have been keeping busy. 40 million credits was the assessment for almost 3 generations ago, possibly 4. Since then, they discovered additional off-planet interests, and some rather more insidious implications. I saw. Lorem nodded, sipping lightly at her drink. House Pelavon didn't just lose its best assets, the removal of key income generators causing... What was the phrase? A protracted and systematic collapse of revenue over time. It's a charming way to say the meatiest assets got picked clean, leaving the bones to fall apart. She took a sip of the Kavan. It was excellent, of course, though she'd always had to import her own. That had grown considerably more difficult in recent months. As a turn of phrase, it still captures things rather succinctly. I'm convinced they're their own species, Lorem said dourly, gesturing at a hard copy on her desk. Useful, but a language unto themselves. How many of them cooked up this abomination of chartered accountancy, anyway? Once the actuaries were called in, they took up 3 rooms and were asking to draw from the temp pool. Potek sniffed, taking a rather long sip of the memory. Still, they got there in the end. And you believe the higher damages are needed? Laura made it a statement more than a question. She looked resigned, even tired, but there was still titanium in her spine. I do, particularly since the original instigators of this scheme are long dead. The base figure is only the literal cost, while the second is adjusted for current value. It was hard not to smack her lips. Perhaps it was the Kavan, but certainly the conversation was heady enough. There was blood in the water. As High Advocate, I do have to assess the Ministry of Justice's position on compensation due for estimated damages. So yes, that's my position. Absolutely and unequivocally. Lorem looked at her drink, swirling it in the glass slowly. It could be argued that a family that can't mind their own affairs deserves to lose them. That is a position the Ministry of the Interior could take. It is not the position of the Ministry of Justice. The words were firm. They had to be. While I understand you walk a fine line, there have to be consequences, and in my work, they have to be seen to be done. Otherwise, this sort of thing will get out of control. Yes, thank you. I am very aware of that, particularly lately. Coming from Laura, that was positively sharp. I'm sorry. I know this has been a trying time for you. The words sounded like a platitude, but they were genuine nevertheless. This business with Princess Satora. Yes, that. Princess Kalandri was expected to join the military, but if she had to die, it would have been a damn bit more convenient if it was a diving accident here at home. Lorem took a fortifying breath. That was crass, forgive me. With the Empress forced away from Shil for such a considerable time, matters have been rather more exacting on the interior. First the air, and now that abominable business. An uncomfortable silence fell. Despite the congenital relationship they enjoyed, this wasn't a social call, and Potek forced herself to break it. If things continue, the interior may have to take a stand. The Empress has not made her choice for a successor, and there are too many hungry nobles here on Shil who won't be content to wait. There are already voices, and if I've heard them, then by the deeps I know full well that you have. Their position on the interior in the public eye remains as impartial as it is firm. We shall execute the will of Her Imperial Majesty once that will is made known. In the meantime... Potek didn't like breaking in on her colleague. Even amongst equals, it wasn't a healthy habit. You know that report could go a long way towards silencing speculation, if it's framed appropriately, when we issue a news release. If it could, yes. Very possibly. Lorem gave her a long and searching look. Will it? I'll see to it personally. In the end, it's not about the money. The settlement will be damaging, and while a large house would shrug it off, it's more about consequences and making an example. She offered it over with a shrug. It wasn't as if the matter were difficult. The more perceptive nobles will notice the redress and restrain the more restive and intemperate members of their houses. They'll also note that we're allowing Alea and her kin to retain their positions and recover, provided they do so quietly. Justice and mercy, with a large stick attached, although the latter is more up your stream. Yes, and it sets a precedent so this kind of thing won't happen again, at least for a generation or two. Something for my successor to worry about. Lorem took a rather longer sip this time, looking at the report like something venomous. Potek couldn't really blame her. The timing of the thing was probably useful, but it was just as certainly appalling. Still, her hostess made up her mind with alacrity. Fine. 486 million credits. Have your people issue a statement, and mine will ensure the lesson sticks. Silence fell again. The matter at hand was settled, but matters at large were still in play. It was impolite to bring it up. The Kavan really was excellent, but Lorem was a traditionalist. Normally, it was a laudable quality, but the times were anything but normal. Despite the danger, a nudge was necessary. You know, things are in motion, Lorem. The heirs. Potek had the decency to look her hostess in the eye, rather than study her drink. Commodity really isn't suitable. That's one opinion. I'm sure Her Imperial Majesty will have her own. I'm sure, but matters are playing out now, at this very moment. You know precisely what I'm talking about. Indeed, events were unfolding. The Empress was still away, and if her absence continued, the options for making her will known could be rather limited. After all, aside from the Empress, they both had a third party to consider, present in the room or not. At least there'd been time to change her top. After dropping by her room and washing up, Desi made her way over to Melondi's, following her friend inside and watching as she closed the door. Mel leaned back against it and shrugged, looking up at the air vent. Smile, you're on camera, though I can ask them to shut down if you want. Desi shot a wary look up at the vent before shaking her head. I'm not going to attack you. Does it show that much? Have a seat. You look as uncomfortable as a bull Rakiri. And no, don't ask how I know. Mel strode over to her closet but swung around, putting her back against the door. It's just clothes, Des. What's the big deal? Your Royal Highness? She tried to mask it, but it was there all the same. Yes, my advisor? Mel grinned, playing along. This would be sweet if it wasn't so damn embarrassing. Your Royal Highness, I adore you. Desi slumped down in the chair and looked at her friend. But sometimes you can be dense as a white dwarf. Desi watched the look of consternation cross Melondi's face. It was Melondi, but underneath it all she was still Princess Kalira Tassu. After her unasked-for epiphany with Dihsala, it only seemed fair to share the wealth. Have you ever seen me out of the school uniform, Mel? Like ever? Honestly, not much. Mel canted her head. You're wearing the school uniform pants and a pullover for the dive team. Desi sighed inwardly. Given the way she blundered through things with Dihsala, it was a tribute to Mel being that fast, that good a listener. Either that, or she had been that slow dealing with Dihsala. However, it worked. Mel stood there against her closet, looking utterly poised and ready to listen, the way Desi hoped she'd looked, and probably hadn't. Which I brought to blend in, Mel. It was so hard not to vent all the exasperation she felt. I bought the sweaters to blend in with the rest of you, and they cost me a lot of credits. Everything else I have came out of a fabber, with a lot of help from Mr. Thario. The tailor you took Jax to see? Yes. My things can pass at a distance, but not up close. I'm always stuck in a jersey to cover the rest up. I even do my laundry late at night so no one will see. She actually did sigh then. It slipped out, but this was just mortifying. Can you imagine what it's like to always be embarrassed about what you wear? This is all I have. What's that film your father was talking about? The animated thing with the princess he was comparing himself to? Desi didn't follow where that was going, but fair enough. Socratic questions were wearing off on all of them. Lilo and Stitch? Is that the one with the glass slipper? I thought that was the one with the alien. Oh, I think it was Cinderella? Something like that? Fine, so that was Mel's point. Desi's stomach rebelled as she felt the knot of tension inside. It had been building all week, all morning since she looked at her schedule. But now that she'd admitted her feelings, she didn't want to brush past this. Mel was the only person she'd ever dared say this to, and now that she had, just brushing it aside felt wrong. I get it, but are you listening? I probably couldn't afford a single outfit in your closet. Deeps, forget the probably. She tried not to wail. She really tried. This is embarrassing for me. I know, and I hear you, Desi. I do. I don't know anyone who deserves it more, though. Mel nodded slowly, then cocked her head again. All right, I've grown up rich. Even my mother's best friend, Lady Samilla, she was running a gang years ago. Though I don't think she was ever poor. I don't think she'd allow herself to be. But you? You started with nothing and you've made everything for yourself, because that's who you are. So stop being silly. Why do you think I listened to you in the first place? Mel spun around and pulled open her closet, sticking her head inside and rummaging about. You're my advisor, and you're going to look the part, both this shell and at the party for the painters. We just need something that says attaché, and I think I've got just the thing. The party? Absolutely the party. People have no idea where I've been, what I've been doing, or who I've been doing it with. Mel stuck her head out and gave her a look. Well, you're my advisor, and that's exactly what people are going to see. Trust me. As close as we look, you're going to look great in this, when I can find it. So, that's what the meeting is about tonight. The details? Mm-hmm. I've already had my handler reach back to the palace, and they're setting it up for next shell. Ah, here it is. The palace. Just like that. Desi watched as Mel pulled out an outfit and held it up to herself before tossing it on the bed. The suit was a rich red that had a subtle tinge of pink, and the jacket had a sharp and professional military look to it. Expensive. She ran her hands over the label. It all came down to the fabric. A fabber could make any cut, given good enough programming, but you could always tell hand-stitching up close where it counted. It was like comparing Fab synth thread to Jacksmith silk. This was the real thing. "Oh, here." Mel grabbed something out of the top shelf and tossed it over. She reached up and felt the matching beret. Turning it over in her hand, she let her thumb run over the thick felt. The knot in her stomach went away, replaced by a lump in her throat. It wasn't the kind you'd find in a second-hand store. Desi watched as Professor Warwick, Tom, her father, sorted through Container 3. When she and the rest of the girls helped Tom unpack the containers, it had been a source of treasures and mysteries. The first 2 cargo containers were sorted. Every item was catalogued and stored. Now empty, they had been sent off to be put back to work. Now misnamed, Container 3 was all that remained. The smallest of the 3, it held the remnants of the collection that was yet to be sorted, and her father's personal things. If she looked over, she could see the hint of photo albums and other boxes she poked into. If her father had ever noticed they'd been disturbed, he'd never said. What are we looking for?" Leaning out from behind a rack, he looked at her a moment and grinned. "Dad, it's okay to say it, you know." "I appreciate it, sir. It's just going to take time." Thank the deeps the container was dimly lit. She could feel the blush rising fast. "I wanted to ask, why Dad? I understand it means father, but it's what? An informal version?" Come to think of it, I hadn't heard that in Vatica. Tom stopped digging through the boxes and frowned a bit. "I suppose when I got here, all the parents were introduced as mothers, co-mothers, and fathers. But I was so wrapped up in getting here that I suppose I didn't notice. At the time, it just seemed formal." "Shorvanti parents are revered. Well, most are." Desi swallowed, groping for the right words. "I suppose I've been getting an education in that lately." Tom set a box down and made his way over. Looking for something to sit on without success, he slid down, propping himself against the wall. "What? You mean like Mel's father?" Desi looked up sharply at that. "We don't talk about that, sir. It's not discussed in polite company, ever." "Yeah, I get that. It's been kind of hard not to notice, though." He sniffed, his features not quite scowling in thought. "I read the official story, but banishing all public mention? That's got to be hard."
That is, it was personally distressing for her mother, so..."
Desi shook her head, firmly. Deeps. Every time he seemed so normal, something like this came out.
It's just not done. It's impolite."
"I suppose I understand. Humans can get pretty gossipy, but I guess discretion isn't dead in the Empire." He shrugged after a moment. "That's not a bad thing. Hopefully it will catch on back home. But you were saying?"
"Oh, well, you prefer Dad in private. It's English, though. The word doesn't translate into Vatica, and now I can call someone father."
Desi shook out her thoughts and broke out into a grin.
"I want people to hear it."
Tom took a breath and nodded. "Makes sense. I'll tell you a thing. My father was a bit of a stuffed shirt. That means he was very proper. Something he got from my grandfather, who was worse. He always liked me calling him father instead of dad, so I guess that's why I like dad instead. But I like people knowing what you're calling me a lot more. So, professor in class, father in public. Sound good?"
"So, it's been a weird day."
The talk of the twins ran through her mind.
"A very, very weird day. But it's a good day." "That sounds perfect, father."
She'd give him a proper hug later. Right now, leaning back and looking at him felt just right.
"Thank you."
"You're welcome. Anyway, this isn't going to find itself." Tom stood up and worked his way back toward the boxes, digging out another one. "We can't be late for this meeting tonight. I really wish I could tell Miv what's going on." Desi let out the breath she'd been holding, as she watched him poke through the box with the photo albums and toss it to one side.
She thinks of you as a father too, you know?
What? Tom's head poked up again, peering at her over a stack of boxes. You keep doing that and we're going to be late. So splaining, Lucy.
Mel, we talk all the time, and she doesn't say anything often, but I can still tell. I think she's kind of afraid to, considering...
Desi took a breath, trying to get it right.
Since the thing in the library and all. I mean, all the girls like you, but you matter a lot to her.
Oh. He looked at her in the dim light, and held very still. If it ever comes up between you, I don't want to put her on the spot. Hell, we probably don't dare, but you can tell her that means a great deal to me.
I will. I promise.
Desi kept herself from biting her lip, then flounced an exaggerated shrug.
What is it you're looking for? I could help.
It will probably take more time to explain than it will to find it. It's somewhere here in the 70s and 80s collection. Toward the back of the container, there was the sound of another seal being opened, and she sat listening to the sound of things being scattered about. They'd inventory it later, together. I'm pretty sure I buried it underneath these boxes, but I'm not finding it yet. There seemed nothing for it but to wait, but there were so many questions.
So, your grandfather was...
a chemist. Made a lot of money back in the day. Something probably as impressive as banging rocks together now. The sound of rummaging slowed. Funny story, he thought he was a good hand as an architect. Designed his own house from the ground up.
That's pretty impressive.
Desi bit her lip, considering the scope of two very different fields. Human architecture wasn't primitive. Less advanced materials and less sophisticated construction, but still. I suppose. Unfortunately, he forgot to put in stairs to the second floor. What? Surprised, Desi shot a look toward the back of the container.
You're kidding me, right?
Nah, true story. Part of family law, sort of thing. Tom's voice echoed in the cargo pod, and she felt a little foolish staring at the mound of boxes and carry cases. Still, she looked in his direction. Just goes to show that being rich doesn't mean you can't still make an idiot of yourself.
You've met my classmates.
Desi looked away, pondering the box with the photo albums, and wandered over to tidy it away.
It's not like I don't already know.
Yeah, I suppose. There was the sound of more rustling and another box being cut open. A few of them, but it's a parent's right to nag now and then. Repetition is all part of passing on the life lessons we think are important. Hopefully more of them are than aren't. Desi thought it over.
I've had co-mothers that treated me like trash when they weren't just ignoring me. Being nagged now and then, it kind of sounds like saying you love someone, so I wouldn't mind a little nagging.
You've got a deal then, and... oh, hey, here it is. She put down the little white cube of plastic labelled a Game Boy. Despite the name, it didn't look pornographic, and it probably wasn't, but the only two buttons were Select and Start.
What is it, exactly?
Back to the Future. Belder asked me to get her some music for when she pops the question. I had one of them on my home system, but I only had the movie downloaded. There was more rummaging, but it had the quickest aspect of putting things away. I needed to come get the soundtrack. Desi shrugged and looked at the pale grey device again, giving it a tentative shake, when the sound of Tom's Omnipad rang. Desi cocked her head to one side, listening. Hey, Miv, what's... Wait, how much? No, that's amazing. Have you called Shalea? Well, break it to her gently, alright? Or talk as soon as I get home. Wow. Love you.
Father, is everything alright?
I'm rich. I'm wealthy. I'm independent. I'm socially secure. The words were barely audible, but then she heard him giggle. She never heard that before. Sorry, things are fine. Just channeling my inner Daffy Duck.
You're in a what?
There was the sound of movement, and after a moment, she spotted the top of his head emerging behind a row of crates, carefully picking his way toward her. Cartoon character. Sort of our patron deity of exasperation. Remind me to show you Duck Dodgers. The words made no sense at all, but that was so very human. It would all come out eventually.